The massive alien vessel Dominion's Edge moved silently through the cold darkness of space, its hull gleaming like polished obsidian against the distant stars. Inside the ship's command center, Commander Vextel stood before a holographic display showing the third planet from the yellow star. His reptilian features twisted into what might have been amusement as he studied the primitive world below. "Another backward planet," he said to his aide Krendel, who stood nearby with a datapad in his clawed hands. "Look at this pathetic display. They still burn fossil fuels to power their cities. Their fastest ships barely reach their own moon." Hologram rotated slowly, showing Earth in all its blue and green beauty. To the aliens, it was just another resource to be harvested. Cities sparkled like tiny jewels across the continents. Completely unaware that death watched from above, Krendel's scaled fingers moved across his device, pulling up more information. "The dominant species calls themselves humans, Commander. They have divided their world into nearly 200 separate territories. They fight among themselves constantly." "How many soldiers do they have?" Vexel asked, his voice carrying the bored tone of someone who had conquered dozens of worlds. "Their largest military force has fewer than 2 million active personnel. Most of their weapons are still projectile-based. They have some nuclear devices, but nothing that could penetrate our shields." The commander laughed, a harsh sound that echoed through the bridge. "Nuclear weapons. We stopped using such crude devices 3,000 years ago. These creatures are barely past the Stone Age." Far below on Earth, Lieutenant Kim Tae-ho sat in the underground command center at Cheyenne Mountain. The young Korean officer had been on duty for 6 hours, monitoring satellite feeds and communication channels. His coffee had grown cold hours ago, but he remained alert. Watching for any signs of trouble, Kim had joined the military because he wanted to protect his country. His father had been a soldier, and his grandfather before him. It was a family. The tradition of service that stretched back generations. He never imagined that one day he might be called upon to defend not just Korea, but all of humanity. On his screens, everything looked normal. Weather satellites showed storm systems moving across the Pacific. Communication satellites relayed phone calls and internet traffic. Military satellites tracked aircraft and ships around the globe. Nothing seemed out of place. In Seoul, Dr. Park Minsu worked alone in her laboratory at the Korea Advanced Institute of Science and Technology. She had been studying atmospheric electromagnetic phenomena for over a decade, trying to understand how solar radiation affected Earth's upper atmosphere. Her work was important, but not glamorous. Few people understood what she did, and even fewer cared. Tonight felt different, though. Her instruments were picking up strange readings from the ionosphere. The electromagnetic signatures were unlike anything in her database. They seemed almost artificial, as if something was scanning the atmosphere with advanced technology. She ran the data through her analysis programs 3 times, but the results remained the same. Something was definitely up there. Something that shouldn't exist according to current human understanding of physics. Park reached for her phone to call her supervisor, then hesitated. If she reported this, and it turned out to be equipment failure, she would look foolish. Her career was just beginning to take off. She couldn't afford to be seen as someone who jumped at shadows. She decided to run one more test, then file a routine report in the morning. It was a decision that would haunt her for the rest of her life. Back on the alien ship, Commander Vextel continued his review of humanity's capabilities. The Vorthok Empire had been expanding across the galaxy for over 10,000 years. Had conquered hundreds of worlds and absorbed dozens of species into their ranks. Each victory had been easier than the last. "Their space program is particularly amusing," Krendel noted, bringing up images of human rockets. "They still use controlled explosions to escape their gravity well. Most of their attempts end in failure, and their military," Vextel asked, "disorganized and primitive. They have no unified command structure. Each territory maintains its own forces. They spend more time preparing to fight each other than developing real defenses." The commander nodded with satisfaction. The Vorthok had learned long ago that divided worlds were easy to conquer. Unity was humanity's greatest possible strength, and they had none. What about their technology level? Crude but functional. They have basic computers, simple aircraft, and ground vehicles. Their most advanced fighters are subsonic and carry primitive missiles. A single Vorthok battlecruiser could destroy their entire air force. Vextel made his decision quickly. Vorthok Empire was vast and had many worlds to conquer. He couldn't waste time or resources on such an obviously weak target. Recommend minimal force allocation, he said, sealing the report with a gesture. To battle cruisers should be more than sufficient for complete planetary subjugation. Be done here in a few days and can move on to more challenging targets. As the alien survey ship prepared to leave Earth's solar system, none of its crew realized they had just made the greatest mistake in their empire's history. They had looked at humanity and seen only weakness, never imagining that sometimes the greatest strength comes from being underestimated. The sky above Sol turned black as the massive alien ships descended from the heavens. People on the streets stopped walking and stared upward in disbelief. The vessels were enormous, each one the size of a city block, their dark hulls reflecting the morning sunlight like polished metal mirrors. Admiral Morthic stood on the bridge of his flagship, Eternal Conquest, watching the primitive world below through his command screens. He had done this same routine on 47 other planets. The process was always the same: arrive, demand surrender, crush any resistance, and move on to the next target. Begin the announcement, he ordered his communications officer. Across Earth, every television screen, radio, and computer suddenly displayed the same message. The alien's voice was deep and mechanical, translated into every human language simultaneously. Inhabitants of the Third World, you will submit to Vorthok authority. Your weapons cannot harm us. Your defenses are useless. Resistance will result in the sterilization of your population centers. You have 1 hour to surrender unconditionally. In the Blue House in Seoul, President Lee stared at the massive ships hovering over his capital city. His hand shook as he reached for the red phone that connected him to military command. This was not how he had imagined spending his Tuesday morning. General Kim, he said when the call connected. What are our options, sir? Our Air Force is scrambling now? Honestly, those ships are bigger than anything we've ever seen. Our missiles might not even scratch them. Similar conversations were happening in every capital city around the world. In Washington, the president huddled with his advisors in the Situation Room. In Moscow, the premier called an emergency meeting of the Defense Council. In Beijing, military leaders studied radar images of the alien vessels with growing concern. The aliens didn't wait for an answer. Exactly 1 hour after their announcement, bright beams of energy shot down from the ships. Military bases around the world erupted in flames as the plasma weapons carved through concrete and steel like a hot knife through butter at Asan Air Base. Captain Yoon Ji-woo was already in her cockpit when the first energy beam struck the runway. The explosion shook her fighter jet, but the plane remained intact. She had been a pilot for 8 years and had trained for many scenarios, but fighting aliens was not one of them. Phoenix Squadron, this is Phoenix Leader, she said into her radio. We're taking off now, whether the runway is ready or not. Fighter jet roared to life, engines screaming as she pushed the throttle forward. Behind her, 11 other Korean pilots followed her into the sky. They knew they were probably flying to their deaths, but they also knew they had to try. The alien fighters were waiting for them. The enemy aircraft were sleek and curved, about twice the size of the human jets. They moved with impossible grace, their energy weapons charging with an ominous blue glow. All Calcines, this is Phoenix Leader, Gu's voice crackled over the radio. We're outgunned, but not outfought. Use the terrain, use their size against them. She dove toward the city below, her jet screaming between the tall buildings of downtown Seoul. The massive alien fighters followed, but their size worked against them in the narrow spaces between skyscrapers. They had to slow down and be careful, not to crash into the buildings. Lieutenant Park Dong-woo, flying Phoenix 3, launched 2 missiles at the nearest alien fighter. The weapons struck the enemy's shields and exploded harmlessly. But the alien pilot was forced to swerve to avoid a glass office tower. Their shields are strong, Park reported, but they can't maneuver like us. Ji-woo smiled grimly.
Then we
make them follow us where they don't want to go. She led her squadron through the urban canyon, weaving between buildings and under bridges. The alien pilots grew frustrated, firing energy beams that missed their targets and instead carved smoking holes in empty office buildings. The battle was chaos. Human jets darted like angry wasps around the larger alien craft, firing missiles and machine guns at point-blank range. The alien shields absorbed most of the damage, but the constant attacks were wearing them down. Lieutenant Kim Sung-ho in Phoenix 7 spotted his chance. An alien fighter had become trapped between two tall buildings, unable to turn quickly enough. He dove straight at the enemy craft, firing everything he had. Phoenix 7 going in. He shouted over the radio. His missiles struck the alien fighter's weakened shields. For a moment, nothing happened. Then the alien craft exploded in a brilliant flash of light, its debris raining down on the streets below. The human pilots cheered, but their celebration was short-lived. Energy beams from the larger ships above began targeting them directly. Phoenix 5 exploded in midair. Phoenix 9 crashed into a building, its pilot unable to eject in time. On the alien flagship, Admiral D. Morthic stared at his tactical display with growing confusion. The primitive aircraft should have been destroyed within minutes. Instead, they were still fighting, still causing damage to his forces. "Sir," his tactical officer reported, "we have lost 2 fighters and damaged 3 others. The primitive aircraft are using unconventional tactics." Unconventional? Morthic's voice carried disbelief. "They are flying chemical-powered aircraft against our energy shields. This should be impossible." "They continue fighting despite obvious defeat," the officer replied. "This behavior is ... illogical." Morthic had conquered dozens of worlds, but he had never encountered anything like this. Most species surrendered when they saw the overwhelming power of the Vorthok fleet. Those that resisted usually gave up after losing a few ships, but these humans kept fighting, even when they were clearly outmatched. They didn't seem to understand that they had already lost. The rain fell steadily on the ruins of Busan as Staff Sergeant Han Du-yong crawled through the broken concrete and twisted metal. It had once been South Korea's second-largest city. 6 months had passed since the aliens arrived, and the world Han knew had been destroyed. Where bustling streets once carried millions of people, now only scattered groups of survivors. Moved like ghosts through the wreckage, Han pressed himself against a collapsed wall as he heard the familiar whine of alien patrol craft overhead. The Vorthok had taken control of all major cities, but they were learning that controlling buildings was not the same as controlling people. The sergeant waited until the sound faded, then continued his dangerous journey through the urban wasteland. He carried important information in his backpack. For weeks, he had been watching the alien patrols, studying their movements, learning their patterns. What he discovered would change everything for the human resistance. The journey to the Taebaek Mountains took 3 days. Night, hiding in abandoned buildings and bombed-out subway stations during the day. The aliens had sensors that could detect human heat signatures, but they seemed to rely too heavily on their technology. They never posted guards in places where a human might hide. Deep in the mountains, the Resistance had built a command center in an old mine shaft. The entrance was hidden behind fallen rocks and covered with camouflage netting. Inside, dozens of people worked by candlelight and battery-powered lamps, coordinating the fight against their alien occupiers. Colonel Park Soon-min had been a Special Forces officer before the invasion. Now he led the largest resistance cell in Korea. He was a small man with quick eyes and calloused hands. The kind of soldier who had spent his career preparing for exactly this type of war. "Report," he said simply when Han arrived. "Been watching their patrol patterns for 6 weeks," Han said, spreading a hand-drawn map on the wooden table. "They're predictable. Same routes, same timing, same formations. They never vary their tactics." Park nodded thoughtfully. "What else? They fight like machines, sir. When we attack one of their convoys, they always respond the same way. Form a defensive circle, call for air support, and wait for reinforcements. They never try anything new. This was valuable information. The Vorthok had superior technology, but they seemed to lack the flexibility that made human soldiers dangerous. They followed their training manual exactly, never adapting to changing situations. In another part of the underground complex, Dr. Choi Hijin worked by the light of salvaged computer screens. Before the invasion, she had been a senior researcher. At Samsung, working on advanced electronics and communication systems, now she was humanity's best hope for understanding alien technology. Her laboratory was built in an abandoned subway tunnel beneath Seoul. The walls were lined with captured alien equipment, pieces of destroyed fighters, and broken communication devices. Her team of engineers and scientists worked around the clock, trying to reverse engineer the technology that had conquered their world. "Show me what you found," she said to her assistant, Lee Minho, who had been a graduate student before becoming a resistance fighter. "We've been analyzing the energy shields on their vehicles," Lee explained, pointing to a complex diagram on his computer screen. "They operate on rotating frequencies, but the pattern is always the same. Every 12 seconds, the frequency drops to almost nothing for exactly 0.3 seconds. Choi smiled for the first time in weeks. "That's our window. If we can time our attacks perfectly, we can punch through their shields. But how do we deliver enough force in such a short time?" Lee asked. "We don't use more force," Choi replied. "We use smarter force." She had been working on a new type of weapon, something that combined human engineering with alien technology. It was crude compared to Vorthok weapons, but it didn't need to be perfect. It just needed to work. Above ground, the war continued. The aliens controlled the cities, but the countryside belonged to the resistance. Every day brought new attacks on alien supply convoys, communication stations, and patrol bases. The humans couldn't win pitched battles, but they could make the occupation expensive and dangerous, Captain. Nexther of the Vorthok occupation force was growing frustrated. He had been a military officer for 30 years and had helped conquer 15 different worlds. None of them had been like this. The primitives refused to acknowledge defeat, he reported to his superiors. They employ tactics that violate standard military doctrine. When we destroy one of their bases, 2 more appear. When we kill their leaders, new ones take their place. His superior, General Morvik, was equally confused. These humans are supposed to be a Category 3 species. They should have surrendered months ago. "They don't fight like any Category 3 species I've encountered," Nexther replied. "They seem to learn from each battle. Their tactics are constantly evolving." This was the problem the Vorthok could not understand. They had conquered many worlds, but they had never faced an enemy like humanity. Most species fought according to logical patterns. They protected their most important resources, defended their population centers, and surrendered when defeat became inevitable. Humans did none of these things. They abandoned their cities and fought from the wilderness. They sacrificed themselves for strangers. They continued fighting even when victory seemed impossible. Back in her underground laboratory, Dr. Choi watched as her team's first hybrid weapon powered up successfully. The device was ugly and crude, built from salvaged parts and held together with wire and determination, but it worked. The aliens had given humanity the greatest gift possible. They had provided the motivation to evolve beyond anything humans had ever imagined. Every captured piece of technology, every observed weakness, every small victory was teaching humanity to become something more than they had been before. The real war was just beginning. The massive Vorthok command ship Wrath of Dominion hung in the sky above the Yellow Sea like a dark metal mountain. For 8 months, it had been the symbol of alien control over East Asia, its communication arrays coordinating the occupation of dozens of major cities. But today, everything would change. Major Oh Soon-kwan crouched in the abandoned coal mine, 3 kilometers below the alien vessel. His team had been planning this attack for 3 months, using salvaged mining equipment and homemade explosives to create the most ambitious operation in human history. They were going to steal an alien warship. "Final equipment check," Oh whispered to his team of 20 volunteers. Each person carried modified construction tools that Dr. Choi's team had converted into weapons. They looked like ordinary mining gear, but hidden inside were the hybrid weapons that could punch through Vorthok shields. The plan was insane. They would detonate explosives in the mineshaft, creating a controlled collapse that would launch them directly into the ship's lower hull. The timing had to be perfect, or they would all die in the explosion. Remember, we need their communication array intact, O shouted over the sound of the final preparations. Ah! Everything depends on it. At exactly 14:30, the explosives detonated. The controlled blast launched a massive chunk of rock and debris upward like a volcanic eruption. Hidden inside the debris, O and his team rode the explosion into the sky, their modified equipment protecting them from the impact. The rock crashed into the alien ship's hull, creating a gaping hole in its armored underside. Alarms began screaming. Throughout the vessel, as atmosphere rushed out into space, the aliens had never experienced an attack like this. OE's team poured through the breach, their hybrid weapons firing streams of energy that the Vorthok shields couldn't stop. The alien soldiers inside were caught completely off guard. They had been trained to fight conventional battles, not to deal with humans who turned mining equipment into weapons of war. Sector 7 is secure, reported Sergeant Kim So-young, who had been a computer programmer before the invasion. Moving to the communication center, the fighting was brutal, but brief. The Vorthok soldiers were skilled, but they were fighting in their own ship, worried about damaging critical systems. Humans had no such concerns. They fought with the desperation of people who had nothing left to lose. Dr. Choi's hybrid weapons proved devastatingly effective. The Vorthok shields had been designed to deflect pure energy attacks, but they couldn't adapt to weapons that combined human kinetic force with alien plasma technology. Every shot from the human weapons punched through the alien defenses like they were made of paper. Within 2 hours, the wrath of Dominion belonged to humanity. Commander Vextel, same alien who had dismissed Earth as a Category 3 world, now sat in his own brig as a prisoner. He watched through the cell's energy bars as Sergeant Kim worked at the ship's control systems. Her fingers moved across the alien interfaces with shocking ease. "How do you comprehend our technology so quickly?" he asked, his voice filled with confusion and growing fear. Kim looked up from the glowing alien console. "We don't just learn it," she said simply. "We make it better." She was right. In the weeks that followed, human engineers began modifying the captured ship. They removed systems they didn't need and added others that improved performance. The hybrid human-alien technology was crude but effective, combining the best of both worlds. The real victory, however, came from the ship's communication system. When the humans activated the Vorthok communication network, news of their impossible victory spread across the galaxy in minutes, on distant worlds. Other conquered species received the message with disbelief. The Zephyrians, who had been slaves for 3 centuries, whispered about the humans who had done the impossible. Corvani, whose homeworld had been destroyed by the Vorthok, began to speak of hope for the first time in generations. A Category 3 species defeated the Vorthok, asked General Dekvar of the Zephyrian resistance. "This cannot be possible." But the evidence was undeniable. The humans had not only captured a Vorthok command ship, but were now using it to coordinate attacks across their entire planet. More shocking still, they were building improved versions of alien technology. Admiral Morthic, commanding the Vorthok occupation fleet, received the most disturbing report of his career from his intelligence officer. "Sir, the primitives have not only captured our vessels, but are now building improved versions. Their reverse engineering capabilities exceed our projections by several orders of magnitude." Morthic stared at the tactical display showing human-modified ships launching from hidden bases around Earth. "How is this possible? They are supposed to be barely beyond their Stone Age." "They learn faster than any species we have encountered," the officer replied. "Each captured system teaches them something new. They are evolving their technology in real time." The truth was even more terrifying. Humanity wasn't just copying alien technology. They were improving it, making it more efficient, more deadly, and more adaptable. The hunters were becoming the hunted. On Earth, Captain Lee Jinwoo stood on the bridge of humanity's first interstellar warship. It's a hybrid vessel that combined human engineering with captured Vorthok technology. Around him, other ships prepared for launch, each one carrying the hopes of a species that refused to surrender. All ships, "This is Fleet Command," Lee announced over the communication system. "Today we take the fight to them. A galaxy that humanity cannot be conquered." The tide of war had turned. The aliens had awakened something they did not understand, and now they would face the consequences of their arrogance. The sky above Kethmore, the proud homeworld of the Vorthok Empire, burned with the light of 1,000 explosions. Human-designed ships, crude but deadly, carved through the orbital defenses that had protected the alien capital for 10,000 years. The sleek Vorthok vessels, once symbols of unstoppable power, now tumbled through space as burning wreckage. Admiral Park High-One stood on the bridge of the New Sol, a battleship that had once been the Vorthok command vessel Wrath of Dominion. The ship still looked alien from the outside, but inside, human engineers had rebuilt everything. The walls were covered with Korean writing, and the controls had been modified for human hands. "Admiral, we're receiving surrender signals from the remaining orbital platforms," reported Lieutenant Yu Song-min, who had learned to operate alien communication systems during the Long War. Park nodded but didn't smile. The battle for Kethmore was almost over, but this wasn't really where the war had been won. The real victory was happening on 1,000 worlds simultaneously. A species that had been enslaved for centuries finally threw off their chains. On the distant world of Zefkari, the blue-skinned Zethkar people emerged from underground tunnels where they had hidden for 300 years. They carried weapons made from scrap metal and alien technology, following tactics they had learned from intercepted human communications. Their leader, a scarred warrior named Tekfel, spoke into a captured Vorthok communicator. "This is the Free Zethkari Republic," he announced. "We declare our independence from the Vorthok Empire. We have learned from our human brothers that freedom is worth any price." Similar scenes played out across the galaxy. The Morvelli, a peaceful species that had been conquered without firing a shot, now used human-inspired psychological warfare to turn their Vorthok overlords against each other. The Konthari, whose homeworld had been strip-mined for resources, adopted humanity's most dangerous weapon, the absolute refusal to surrender. Admiral Morthik, the Vorthok commander who had once dismissed humanity as primitive, sat in his damaged flagship as reports flooded in from across the Empire. Every message brought news of another rebellion, another lost world, another species that had learned to fight like humans. "Sir, we've lost contact with the Outer Rim territories," his communications officer reported. "The Corvani have seized control of the mining stations. The Veltari have destroyed our administrative centers. The rebellion is spreading faster than we can respond." Morthik knew the Empire was finished. In his final transmission, broadcast to all Vorthok forces across the galaxy, he spoke words that would be remembered forever. "To all Vorthok forces, we have awakened something that should have remained dormant. The primitives of Earth have taught the galaxy to fight like humans. We measured their strength by their technology and found them wanting. We should have measured their strength by their refusal to accept defeat." On Earth, Dr. Choi Hedgens stood in the ruins of what had once been the Vorthok Command Center in Seoul. The building had been destroyed and rebuilt several times during the war, but now it served as the headquarters for something entirely new. The Galactic Liberation Council. Representatives from dozens of species filled the restored conference room. The Zethkari delegation sat beside human officers. Corvani engineers worked with Korean scientists. Veltari philosophers debated with Earth's diplomats. It was a sight that would have been impossible under Vorthok rule. "We didn't defeat them with superior weapons," Choi reported to the assembled council. "We defeated them with superior spirit. We showed the galaxy that being conquered doesn't mean being defeated. The truth was more complex than that. Humanity had indeed provided the spark that ignited the galactic rebellion. But each species had found their own way to fight. The Zethkari used their knowledge of underground systems. The Corvani turned their industrial skills into weapons production. The Voltari used their psychic abilities to coordinate resistance across vast distances. Commander Vexthel, the alien who had first surveyed Earth and recommended minimal force, now sat in a prison cell that had once been his own flagship. He spent his days writing a detailed analysis of how the mighty Warthog Empire had fallen to what he had called Category 3 primitives. The Empire dies not from human firepower, he wrote, but from the viral spread of human determination. We taught them our technology, thinking it would make them easier to control. Instead, they used our own weapons against us and taught others to do the same. His analysis would later become required reading at the new Galactic Defense Academy, where officers from all species learned the lessons of the war. The most important lesson was simple: never underestimate the power of hope. The Warthog Empire, built on the assumption that technological superiority ensured victory, crumbled under the weight of its own arrogance. For 10,000 years they had conquered through fear and overwhelming force. They had never faced an enemy that refused to stay defeated. Earth became the capital of the new Galactic Alliance. But it was an alliance built on cooperation rather than conquest. Each species contributed what they could, and all decisions were made by consensus rather than force. The humans who had once been dismissed as primitives now served as teachers, showing other species how to combine determination with technology. But they were also students, learning from the wisdom and skills of their new allies. The galaxy was free, and it would never be enslaved again. The Age of Empires was over. The Age of Cooperation had begun.